Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's podcast is a special Power Rankings episode in which a favorite creator or pal comes from comics, joins the show to talk about their favorite things inside and outside of comics. And joining me today is the Eisner-nominated guy behind Giant Days, Bad Machinery, and the upcoming By Night at Boom Studios. It's John Allison. Thanks for coming on, John.
Oh, hi, David. My pleasure.
So, again, for listeners that don't know, these Power Rankings episodes welcome a guest to the show to rank varying things, either in official order. This is semi a guide to you, John. Either in official order, in non-specific order. So if you don't really want to hard rank them, you don't have to. And then chat about the reasons why they're amongst their very favorites. John, I thought you'd be perfect because you've been doing lists of your favorite albums for... How long have you been doing those lists?
I think I started them... Well, I have lists back to 1987, but I think I probably started them in 1993, 92, 93. Once I got up ahead of Steam, so when I was a teenager.
Okay, yeah. So I saw those. I remember seeing those lists when I was reading through Bad Machinery, and I was like, "Oh man, this guy's he's a lister already. He's a ranker. This is great." So we're going to talk about a lot of subjects, but I wanted to start with your glorious shared universe, the Bobbinsverse. Is that what you like to call it?
It's the John Allison cinematic universe.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think that's it. I like to put cinematic universe on the end of it because they increasingly attach it to more and more ridiculous things like the Hasbro cinematic universe, you know, including Visionaries, obviously, in the greater Hasbro cinematic universe. So yeah, I want my own cinematic universe, even though I've not produced anything for the cinema.
Was the Mummy part of the John Allison cinematic universe? I get confused about all these.
The Mummy,
the Tom Cruise one.
That was part of the Universal Monsters cinematic universe. Yeah, I know. I mean, obviously, strictly speaking, you know, I can start, you know, as I write the comic, I can include various factors, you know, just to indicate links between cinematic universes, unite the cinematic universes, if you will. But I haven't yet got the Mummy in. I haven't got it under the roof.
Okay,
under the big tent.
Working Tom Cruise too. He's very popular.
People love that guy, or so I've heard.
So, anyways, we're going to talk about the Bobbinsverse here. I know you don't have a favorite cast member for your books. I'm not going to ask you to rank those. However, I'm kind of curious. There's like certain characters that kind of pop up regularly across all the books. Are there who are the three characters you find yourself most often trying to work into a comic, even if they're not necessarily a great fit? Do you have ones that you just seem to pop up more often than others?
That's an interesting question. There are characters I like to bring back because they unify the universe. They create the kind of coherence. I like Erin Winters, the sister of Shelley Winters. I think she's a character who sort of, as long as she's always growing and changing and, you know, getting more slightly she's demonic in a kind of pleasant way. So she I like to get her in it. Charlotte, again, Charlotte's been in Bad Machinery. She's been in Scary Go Round. She's been in Giant Days. She appeared as a child in an issue of Giant Days, sort of pre-Bad Machinery. So Charlotte, I think, and Shelley Winters. So really, in a way, I've told you who my three favorite actual characters are there.
You know, I believe that. I 100% believe those would be your three favorite.
Yeah, the Winter Sisters and Charlotte are my favorite characters just because they are very malleable to different stories and they fit right in, which means that if you've got a gap, you can slot them in, and they're good actresses. They play their part well.
Mm-hmm. I feel like Charlotte, just by sheer force of will make her way into any story, even if you didn't want her to. It's like, I didn't even draw you. How did you show up here?
If they're easy to write, they're going to turn up. That's the secret. You know, some characters I still struggle to quite get to the heart of. I've struggled to find their voice, but I can always write a Charlotte comic. So if I'm not sure what to do, and sometimes I don't know what to do, I don't know if that's going to upset people or, you know, shake their hold on reality. Yeah, she's probably going to pop up.
You know, that actually ties into something I was reading when I was preparing for this. Is like I read an interview that you said you find writing to be much more natural for you than drawing. Why is that?
I don't know. I think drawing was something I had to learn to do, and it was hard, which made me want to do it because, you know, I looked at comic art and wanted to be that. Whereas writing, when I was at school when I was a kid, I was one of those kids who could spell early on. I found writing easy. There was sort of no impediment to me just loading up the page other than my own laziness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to explain because it sounds conceited, but it's not conceited. I just know how to fill up a page without feeling self-conscious about what I've written. I'm not there tearing myself apart over what I've written.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure that I can live with what I've done. Now that may be a sign that I've got no taste, but I'm pretty sure, and have been since I was a kid, that what I'd done was about as good as it was going to get the first time I finished it with very little revision. So
that's amazing.
But it's, again, it sounds conceited, but it's just the thing I can do. Like, some people can saw a plank of wood straight, whereas I can't do that. It's always wobbly. In drawing, I have to go back and fix things, and it's a mess. And if I saw a plank of wood, I've got to go in there and I've got to sand it and plane it because it looks all wrong. With writing, it's just the one thing I know how to do.
I think if I tried to do that, I'd somehow end up with no more wood because I've sanded it too much. I've sanded it all away.
Well, that's probably true when I go back to fix the artwork for a book. I'm there sanding it all away. It's just like a series of sort of faceless characters.
No, I mean, it is kind of interesting. Like, do you feel like you can definitely see an evolution of your art through all of your work on Scary Go Round and the Bobbins verse in general and everything. But do you feel like your writing has evolved too, or do you feel like you kind of had a good natural feel for it from the start?
Oh, I was terrible at the start. I was terrible. I I didn't know what I was doing. I have got better, I think. I've learned, but you only learn through reading and other people and trying to kind of integrate what they've done. I've learned what I do that doesn't work. I used to be very big on little colloquialisms and mannerisms and tics in speech, and I fell out of love with doing that. And now when I look back at it, it looks a bit mannered.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of dropped final letters on things and apostrophes. But I think I'm still pretty much doing the same thing I did. I just know how to hit the beats, the successful beats, harder than I used to.
That's great. So that leads to the next question. I actually wanted to ask you about colloquialisms because I really, particularly, I don't know why, I really love it when Charlotte says gore, or I don't even know how she properly says it when she's really excited about something. And there's there's a whole mess of these. I'm not saying you do them constantly because you've sanded them so they're not there all the time. But I really enjoy the language you use in your various comics. For listeners that don't know, these colloquialisms are often very young person British language that you use to show character and everything like that. But I'm curious, what are your 3 favorite British colloquialisms that you use in your books? Are there ones you particularly enjoy, or is it just kind of situational?
No, there are some that I enjoy, and I use them over and over again. I use them too much because they show up in all the books. There's one which, some of these are old, so some of these are archaic, and they're things we used to say when we were at school, and I don't know if kids still say them anymore. Partly because I don't live in the same part of the country that I lived in when I went to school, and partly because I just think time moves on. One of my favorites is well. So I said, "Oh, that's well nice," which is a northern thing. So whenever I picture a voice in my head, there was a kids show when I was a kid called Johnny Briggs, which is a really strong local Yorkshire accent for where I lived. It was like a local accent but stronger. So I just play that voice, the Johnny Briggs voice, in my head. And then I try and I kind of extract dialogue. That's like the engine from which I extract dialogue when I feel like things are getting a bit plain or a bit bland, or I'm rushing it. But I'll do an impression and then I'll try and explain how it was. So you talk like this, right? You're talking a really broad voice. So you'd say, "Oh, that's well nice." "Oh, that's great." And that's kind of, so well, I enjoy using well. Then there's Seinfeldisms is another one. I can't help there are some things that have got burned into the comic that I can't seem to get out. So the Terry Hatcher episode where it's real and it's spectacular.
Right.
I sometimes have to take that out of comics because I've used it too much. So often the word spectacular will show up, and the real has been removed. It's real and it's spectacular. And I've just had to take the "it's real" and, because it's just a line from Seinfeld. I've just taken it out of Seinfeld. And there's a few times of that one. So Seinfeldisms that then get kind of gutted in order to preserve my reputation as a creator. And then let me think. Oh dear, this is a really tricky one, David. I'm actually looking at some of my scripts right in front of me.
I have to say, I'm a little surprised by the Seinfeldisms. I guess I didn't notice that before, but it makes sense to a degree.
Oh God, Seinfeld is was the gold standard for me when I first started writing comics. And even though if you look at a Seinfeld script, it looks quite plain. It's weird. It looks quite bald. I've got some of the Seinfeld script books, and if you just read the script back without them saying the words, it's not as funny.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to play the rhythms of that in my head, and then try and like kind of get that feeling, if that makes sense. And then
do you? I know this is totally like going on a different side, but do you feel like your stories have like? Are you going for like a sitcom type rhythm, like that kind of '90s sitcom type vibe?
sometimes it just helps you. It's something you've got to. If you've got no ideas and you've got no structure for a story, you've got to hang it on something.
Right.
And I just try and find the beats from something that I've enjoyed, and they're just the skeleton of the beats. The jokes aren't there, and I just try and hit those points. So in Giant Days, it's 22 pages long, 22 pages, 22 minutes, like a network
Perfect.
sitcom. Hit those beats as fast as you can and as many times as you can, and that's all I do really.
Well, and your books are largely, literally situational comedies, so that makes sense.
I am a humorist. I mean, I think that is probably what. No, I think that probably is what I am. I'm not a comics writer in the sense of Brian Michael Bendis. I'm not a universe builder in the sense of trying to create these epic science fiction universes.
Mm-hmm.
I am effectively a humorist. I'm writing about the human condition, then bolting comics parts onto it. Like, the comics tropes, certain storyline elements that work for the form onto humor writing. And I love drawing, and I don't want to stop, so it's comics. That's kind of where I've ended up, in this weird niche, in a the sort of genre niche where it's not really a huge part of the comics film. I'm very lucky I'm allowed to do it monthly at the moment.
I will say that the underrated part about your stuff, though, is like you're not like the Seinfeld style, because Seinfeld, as much as I love Seinfeld, was not exactly a show with a lot of heart. I would say you're more like the kind of Parks and Recreation style, where it's got like the insanity but also the heart, which is a nice blend.
It's good that Michael Schur made all those shows, because it kind of, again, it just shows you what to do and how you kind of keep those things alive month after month after month.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you don't take things from the show. You take how things persist within the show. This sounds very abstract. I can get very abstract sometimes. How a character persists, how an arc persists, how it kind of like attacks and decays within the context of the show. When you see that work, I make a mental note. I'm like, yeah, that's how you do it. That's how you make that work. That's how you write a character out. That's how you write a character in. And the Michael Schur shows, Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, maybe a little less so. That's a strange show. I could talk about that all day. how that show works and doesn't work. But The Good Place is another great one. And all these, there's so many lessons for writers in those shows. Yeah.
Absolutely one of my favorite. Or I actually I love all three of them. Slightly different ways and reasons and everything like that. But before we move on, colloquialisms. What's your third one? Did you figure one out?
Oh, my third colloquialism. Sorry, David. I'm not.
No, it's okay.
I'm not respecting the form, am I? I'm not respecting the form. I've used the word fit a lot. Fit, which means attractive. That's a British word, which means. And I introduced a character it's a kind of cruel name that kids would give someone because they just attach their parents' name to them. So they call this kid. They just call him Fit Mum because his mother is very attractive. So Fit Mum, but she's also referred to by them as Fit Mum. So the kid is Fit Mum, and that means I can use the word fit, or I've also used fitty, which is a kind of offshoot of that word. A fitty would be somebody who is fit, i.e. attractive. So yes, fit. There you go.
I will say that I was aware of that term. Thank you, The Streets and Mike Skinner. I appreciate you.
Oh, of course, yes, yeah, fit, you fit.
But you know it.
You know it, yes.
Yes.
I recall. Yeah.
I going back to the TV show stuff. That was one thing. Like again, in my research of like reading all this stuff, I read that you don't particularly. It's not that you don't like movies. It's that you don't rewatch movies, and that you don't value movies on the same plane as you do television shows. And it sounds like TV is not that you're sitting around constantly taking notes and just like watching it as if you're like a professor of television studies, but like you really appreciate the form and like the long form narratives that come with that. Is that a true statement?
Oh God, yeah. Oh yeah, I've been obsessed with it since I was a child. Like long form narratives. When I was a kid, my parents there was a lot of quality American drama shown on UK TV. So you wouldn't get the bad shows necessarily because there were only 4 channels. There wasn't space to show the bad shows. You just get the good ones.
Mm-hmm.
So they would show like NYPD Blue at prime time on, or in the evening,
Mm-hmm.
or Twin Peaks. You just get the kind of the highly rated shows, and they would show them the run entirely because they would wait for the run to finish in America or get near the end. Then it would be shown in Britain. So you'd get 22 weeks. Every week you'd get that hour.
Mm-hmm.
There was no interruption for football or, just a mid-season break or whatever, which obviously is part of the production schedule. So you would come to know the shows far more intimately, even than an American audience in the sort of pre-box set, pre-DVD age.
Right.
As a British viewer of those shows, you would know them more intimately than an American viewer would because you were watching them every single week in, week out for 22, 24, 26 weeks. Sometimes in the 90s, things would just run forever. So, yeah, exactly, yeah, I fell in love with the form. Whereas movies, I do enjoy movies. I mean, I probably go and see a movie every week. But I don't watch them twice. No, I watch them for the experience of that sort of immersive 2 hours. But I very, very seldom come out of it having learned something, whereas TV, I still feel like I pick apart every show and its arc and how it works, and I enjoy both the narrative and the kind of production quirks of them.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting because we started joking about the cinematic universes, but I feel like in a very major way, like cinematic universes, particularly like the MCU, is like they're like movies that are adopting a lot of the characteristics of television stories or comics. It's just sequential storytelling. It's telling a continuous narrative over, I don't know, what is it, 20 movies at this point? And it's kind of fascinating seeing that because movies haven't really been done like that before. It's strange.
It is strange. The strangest thing about the Marvel movies, especially the Avengers movies and the ones that play into that sort of central part of it, is the exposition.
Mm-hmm.
and the expectation that the viewer will understand
right.
some very niche, fine points of exposition. And we're not talking about a comics audience because those are mass market movies, the most watched, highest grossing movies ever. And people are supposed to scratch their head and remember what the Sokovia Accords are.
Right,
Really?
exactly.
The Sokovia Accords. I can barely remember what the Sokovia Accords are. And I've read the original Captain America's Civil War. I rely on my knowledge of comics in the 90s and the 80s and the few that I read past my teenage years to kind of put together the bits of these movies that I can't quite recall,
Mm-hmm.
or where the narrative becomes so fractious and the exposition becomes so frantic. It's like, oh right, yeah, I think that's what happens. Yeah, that's why Thanos wears that giant mitten, isn't it? That's right. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm there trying to piece it together with my own knowledge. I think, how on earth does Joe Schmo from Kokomo, who doesn't know, the Infinity Gauntlet from his elbow, put this together and enjoy it? What's he thinking when they're just filling in all those weird plot details? Is he just paying attention to his popcorn? I don't know. I find it very weird.
It is weird, but at the same time, it weirdly works because I have coworkers ask me questions about the Infinity Gauntlet, and my wife can quote Arnim Zola to me, and it's all very bizarre. And like, I definitely I enjoy it, but it's certainly strange that people have bought in so deeply when it's like the comics were always so ridiculous, but cinematic forms. It works differently for different people, but it is fascinating.
This is how cinema is, though. That it weirds me out. It's like people they say attention spans are going down and people's spans of attention are decreasing, yet people are willing to sit for a 2.5 hour movie with some really, really fine plot points, and those are the biggest movies just because they're a bit explodey. If you replaced every Marvel character in those movies with just like a sort of generic Swedish performance artist, but the arcs played out exactly the same, it would be like, would people take it? Would they be willing to accept this? Is it only because it's kind of in pop culture colors that they're willing to to kind of try and parse these narratives. I think it's a fascinating phenomenon.
I desperately want to find out if they would take it if there was Swedish performance artists instead of Robert Downey Jr. Oh my God, we need to fund this. This is another crowdfunding effort we have to bring together.
Straight, 24 hours straight in.
Boom.
Stretch goals immediately achieved.
So I do want to talk about your love of old school superhero stuff. You grew up reading superhero stuff in Marvel UK, like Transformers comics, et cetera, et cetera. But you and I have corresponded about Bullpen Bulletins before, which was Marvel's old update in their comics about current and upcoming comics that also had info from the editorial team, like Stan's soapbox. There's like all kinds of stuff from the old comics that people love, like the nostalgic bits that people really enjoyed from back then. I mean, Marvel's even tried bringing some of them back, but I'm kind of curious, like what are 3 bits from old school comics you wished that we would see more of these days? And Bullpen Bulletins is 100% a legitimate one of those answers if you want to use that.
Oh, well, that's my number one. I love Bullpen Bulletins for 2 reasons. One, because it meant that when you only had maybe like $15 to buy your comics for that month, and you were only going to get to buy 8 comics or whatever, or 7 comics, you knew what was going on in the rest of the Marvel universe. You always knew, at a time when where there are so many Marvel comics and so many like multiples of titles throughout lines, as there were in the 90s, it was so useful. And also it would point out corners of the Marvel universe. I didn't really know what Alien Legion was. I'd seen perhaps one promotional graphic in the back of the book, and apparently Alien Legion was about 4 aliens viewed from the side, standing in a row. That's as much as I ever understood about it. But I knew that it existed, and perhaps at some point, if I saw a trade, I would pick it up and go, oh, so that's what this is. I'm aware of this. Mm-hmm. I know that this exists. Or what was Strike Force Morituri? Well, I found out because the description was good. Whereas now you have to pass so many channels to be across the entirety of the line. So yeah, Bullpen Bulletins is good. But I mean, other companies ape it, but they've never really kind of got it. Like IDW has a Bullpen Bulletins kind of page,
right?
Which kind of works. It kind of works, but
it's not as interesting without the shared universe, though.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, that's all about to change, isn't it? But it was because it was a shared universe that it worked. But also the shared universe and the editorial, when it was all, when you wanted to be in comics, that agglomeration of all of it was quite something. It was all there for you. I was thousands of miles away from Marvel, and those comics were hard to get, but I had a window into that world every time, and that was what Bullpen Bulletins was.
I kind of feel like all that stuff acted as like old school Wikipedia for readers. It's like I talked to a lot of creators. I did this piece on the Marvel Universe trading cards that came out in the early 90s. I don't know if they were as big in the UK as they were over here, but they were massive here, and a lot of creators, like, it was kind of like their gateway into comics because they could read the back, or like they could read these cards that were like famous battles, Doctor Doom versus Fantastic Four or whatever, and it was like they kind of could piece together the universe based off of like, these little pieces of apocrypha. It was very interesting.
Oh no, that's absolutely how it was. Even if you only got a 4-line description of something, and you'd look at it and go, well, I sort of understand what Adam Warlock is now, because I never bought those. I never bought Warlock and the Infinity Gauntlet, but I had a fair idea of which characters were in it just from the little summaries. You sort of knew what part of it was space. Mm-hmm. You knew it was space, and you knew that Adam Warlock was kind of the hero of this thing, and you knew who he was dealing with on a month-to-month basis. Mm-hmm. And you knew who wrote and drew it as well. That was the other important thing, because I was very focused on creators. So if you saw something with the name of someone you liked, you might not have, you might not have seen it in the comic shop. They may not have got it in. But if you knew it was there, you'd be able to keep an eye out for it or ask for it to be held back for you. 2 other things that I really liked. Oh, David. Ooh. Now, one, limited series.
Ooh, yes.
4-issue limited series. I love a limited series. I still find something quite kind of exciting about just that kind of tall type where they would write number 1 in a 4-issue limited series. If I see that on like a book when I'm going through back issue bins, say, I'm like, oh, what was this? This is good. So I think it was, like now, especially with creative teams rotating so fast. I find it strange that the limited series isn't a thing, because it just gave you a chance that here's a story, it's finished. Here's a character we don't think can sustain a book forever. It doesn't matter. The heartbreak of cancellation is not a problem, because the number of issues this is going to run is written on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
And a third thing, well, can I get into numbering?
Of course.
I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here. I don't know if
this is a deep in the weeds podcast.
Panel is the sort of podcast where you talk about such things as comic numbering. I believe it may have come up on occasion.
From time to time.
From time to time. But comic numbering, but months, writing the month on it.
Oh, yeah.
The month. Yeah, write the month on it. The number ultimately doesn't matter. Comics are sequential, and it doesn't matter if it's issue 558 or issue 16 or if it's a new number one. You just want to know which comic came before, which comic came after, so that if you enjoy that one, you can go in the back issue bins and get the previous one. All I want on the cover is the month and the year, obviously. I need to know what year it is. But that's all I want. And I don't know if I'm going to have a look and see a Marvel comic. Oh, no, it's hidden behind my Cintiq, David. If I reach it,
I got one. I have one. I don't think there's a month on there. No month.
No month. Write the month on it. Write the month.
I 100% agree with that, and that's funny because I didn't even notice before that was gone. That would be so helpful, especially with all the renumberings, because here's a good example. I've brought this up in the podcast before because I'm a very repetitive person, I've discovered. Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, comic I love. Ryan North, Erica Henderson, now Derek Charm, Rico Renzi, fantastic. They had 2 number ones in the same year. And
I remember it was like seven issues and then a number one, something
like that. Yeah. And I was like going through my long boxes because I still go that route and trying to organize it. And I was like, I don't know which number 3 goes here. And I was like, I'm just going to put both there. Whatever. I don't care. I'm doing it. And it was like, if I had a month, I could actually figure it out, or a month and year particularly, but still.
Well, here's my feeling, and I don't know. I think I'm going to blow the tops of a few people's heads off here, David.
Let's do it.
I think people know that comics existed in the past prior to their new number ones. And I think people understand that comics are going to continue into the future. And I believe that the system that we have come up with as a society to indicate that there was a past and there will be a future is the calendar. And I think if we were simply to utilize this gift given to us from history, the calendar, instead of renumbering things to prove some fleeting point, I think we could be onto a winner if we were just to simply accept that and write. And if it's a new story, or just write the words "new story" on the cover. It's a new story. Spider-Man has got a new face. He's got a tail now.
Ooh,
new story. Yeah.
Why are you not writing Spider-Man? I read Spider-Man with a tail.
The whole tail thing, that didn't go over too well with the new editorial chief, unfortunately. Yeah, I was out. I was out. The tail.
Too outside the box.
Too outside the costume. That was the problem.
I love the idea of the calendar, although I do think it's funny that they've actually went the other route. I know it's not that big of a deal, but I just find it really hilarious that Marvel now has 2 numbers on their comics. They have like the legacy number, and then they also have like the number of the current series. And I'm just like, this is strange. You guys are weird. Whatever.
Nothing says we are finding it very, very difficult to deal with the fact that our comics have been around for a long time than having 2 numbers on the cover.
Yeah.
I mean, why not introduce a 3rd and 4th number? Why not just keep adding new numbers? They could dedicate the whole left-hand side of the cover eventually to different numbering systems. I don't know. Just give it a go, guys. Roman numerals, binary.
Just use the barcode.
Use the different barcodes. We could have a square one, a rectangular one. I think there's a lot of capacity here to open up that side of things, because comics always needs new ideas, and I think that's a good one.
I think we're currently reinventing comics, which is pretty amazing.
I think this is going to be big.
I really want a second limited series. I actually really like when Marvel would do like maxi series, like 12-issue series, where it was just like a finite story. Although, it is kind of it's sad that like the real reason for this is that it's it's just like people don't or people don't buy limited series as much as they used to, because they're now like wait for trade. And it's I think it's kind of like a self-created problem to a certain degree. It's like what came first, the chicken or the egg? Is like, do people stop buying that because of the trades, or did they stop publishing a limited series because they had this idea in their head? And I don't really know, but I do miss limited series too. It's like I used to not be as big of a fan, but I kind of miss them taking risks on like random characters. Like there was this one comic in like the mid-aughts that was like a comic about Taskmaster, who's an utterly ridiculous character that I love. And they wouldn't do a Taskmaster ongoing series, but they did a random 5-issue miniseries, and it was fantastic. And like I like it when they do things like that. That's fun.
I think, yeah, five might be enough. You know, not everything has to run forever. That's the thing. I don't believe, like, again, we get locked into this idea because of all these high numbers that every comic series has to run for 8 million issues. But you could do an issue about a series about J. Jonah Jameson.
Oh yes.
I don't want to read 40 issues of J. Jonah Jameson. I'd read 5. You know, maybe his car just breaks down. He spends 5 issues trying to get it fixed. That's probably enough.
I just want to see like a 5-issue miniseries of him dealing with memes and clickbait.
Exactly. Yeah, he's just constantly in meetings with like brand advisors and things like that. And eventually, you know, he just can't take it anymore. He goes a bit falling down. He's got the haircut for it, Michael Douglas style. Yeah, there's money here. There's money here, David. We'll do a co-write. I think we can pitch this.
Oh, I love it. Yo everybody, just want to take a second for a quick word from our friends at Comixology Originals. They're launching a line of exclusive original comics with 4 new titles available for free for members of Amazon Prime, Kindle Unlimited, or Comixology Unlimited. They include Savage Game, a graphic novel from the mind of NFL player Ryan Khalil, the return of Richard Starking's Elephant Man, the action-packed Ask for Mercy, and Super Freaks, a perfectly bingeable superhero mystery that has all 5 issues available right now. All can be found on the previously mentioned services, a la carte on Kindle and Comixology, as well as a print version of Savage Game through Amazon.com. Get on these exciting comics today and look for another wave of titles to be announced this summer. And now, back to the show. Okay, so we're going to talk about a comic you have coming out. Kind of. You have a new comic coming in June called By Night, which is a 12-issue sci-fi series from Boom with artist Christine Larson. You know, I want to talk about, you've always kind of touched on more fantastical elements, but this kind of feels more deliberately science fiction because the concept. So it seems like you're a sci-fi fan. I'm curious, what are your 4 favorite science fiction stories? And they can be from any medium. Like what, or maybe not even your 4 favorite, but what are 4 of your favorite?
Okay, well, I don't read a lot of science fiction books. I've always found them a little bit impenetrable. Not all, obviously, but
some are by design.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the hard SF is designed to be read, you know, by people who've practiced. So let's see my 4 science fiction favorites. Again, I can just go for TV. Fringe, Babylon 5, which, you know, controversial. Babylon 5. Now, I should put a Star Trek in there, really, shouldn't I? But again, you know, it's very difficult. Which is the best one? I'm going to go controversy for Voyager.
Oh, what?
Which isn't the best Star Trek show, but does have my favorite Star Trek character in it.
I've never watched Voyager. Who is it?
It's Neelix, the chef.
Oh.
Constantly, ferociously whisking in every scene. And then I would say the X-Files, but it's kind of been spoiled a little bit for me by the
new stuff.
2 new stuff. They weren't terrible, but I don't think they should have done it. I think there were too many leaden notes in amongst, you know, the few very good episodes that there were of it. So I should do a real big space show, Battlestar Galactica, the modern Battlestar Galactica, not Galactica 80 or the original Battlestar Galactica.
I love the modern B-Star. I'm a big fan of that. I actually just showed that, watched that with my wife who had never seen it, and it was an interesting show to rewatch just because the 4 seasons are so kind of different, despite the fact that the creative team is the same throughout. And it's like, I don't know. The third, I feel like the 3rd season kind of runs off the rails a bit, but the 4th season is actually still really good, even though like the ending is kind of bonkers, but I kind of love it. It's basically Ancient Aliens, which is fantastic. But I did, my personal favorite Star Trek is actually Deep Space Nine.
Well, the thing about Deep Space Nine was on, I think, while I was at university, so I missed a lot of episodes.
Mm.
So I never quite got into it like I should. Like I've watched a number of episodes, but people are always like, "Oh man, when you get later on in Deep Space Nine, it gets really good." And I'm like, well, I never kind of got to that point, and it's very hard to approach Deep Space Nine starting at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It feels dated now.
Super
It's
dated.
hard. So I have tried, but I've not been able to like reapproach Deep Space Nine and get into it. Also, if you liked Babylon 5, Deep Space Nine, you very much felt you had to come down on one side or the other.
Mm.
And I liked Babylon 5, so I I was very attached to it, and still am in a way, even though it seems a little hokey now when you watch it. But I've watched it all the way through twice. Once when it originally aired, and then more recently. And I got a huge amount of pleasure out of it, out of rewatching it. So
I do think it's funny how like there's like sometimes these shows that are on at the same time, and it's like we're almost like gangs. It's like you have to like, oh, you have to be a Crip or a Blood, except for in this case, you have to be a Babylon 5 fan or a Deep Space Nine fan, and that's just how it works out.
you're only allowed one space station show. You can't watch two. You can go one way or the other, but you can't have both.
But we had Ferengis.
Babylon 5, David, had Peter Jurassic with his giant crest of hair, the most impressive hairstyle ever viewed on the television screen. Even today, the golden age of peak TV, there was never a crest like Peter Jurassic's Londo Mollari hair. It had Ambassador Kosh. He was effectively a hairdryer wearing a cloak, but he was very powerful. And many other characters. Bruce Boxleitner, Tron himself.
Oh my god, that's incredible.
What more could you want? It was boss from soup to nuts as far as I'm concerned.
I was team Deep Space Nine, so I never crossed over to that side. I've never watched Babylon 5. Maybe I want to because of this hair. It sounds incredible.
Oh, the hair, the hair. I'm very keen to get Babylon 5 into an issue of Giant Days. In fact, I think that could be happening very soon.
Just start sneaking a reference over to Max about like this hair. Just be like, what if somebody had this hair? What do you think about that?
I think it could be much more blatant than that. I think it's time to really come out about how I feel about Babylon 5 in the pages of a comic that I write that is listed to the direct market. I think it's Babylon 5 time. All I'm going to say is watch this space.
I need to check this out. I'm pretty sure Babylon 5 is very accessible at this point, and at some point I'll see it. Although it is always interesting to revisit like 90s or any previous era's science fiction because you're just like, this is rough looking. I don't know about this.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, Babylon 5 at the time seemed incredible. I mean, it was made on like 5 Commodore Amigas daisy chained together, and that was mind blowing. We didn't know how they did that. And it's Hill Street Blues in space. Effectively, it's written along the same model, that same model of TV that large ensemble cast. The storylines sort of work the same way, even though obviously it's got the space battle aspect.
Didn't they have puppets? Were there puppets?
That's Space Precinct, I think.
Oh, okay.
Or yeah, I get confused. There were 2 shows. There was Space Precinct, and then there was a very similar show to Space Precinct. And once again, you had to come down on one side or the other. There were no puppets in Babylon 5. If there had been, I would have been very pleased because I love puppets. But no, there weren't.
Okay, I want to talk about another character you love. I want to talk about weird comic characters, and naturally we have to start with your off-target of love, Death's Head 2.
Oh, yes.
So I want you to give me your 3 favorite things about Death's Head 2, and because it's about Death's Head 2, please make one of them up completely and let me try to guess which one isn't real.
Oh, okay, right. So, Death's Head 2. Oh, I've got to make one of these up. It's going to have to be good. I'm going to have to think about this for a second.
Yeah, take a second. I can always edit around it.
Right, okay, so Death's Head 2, 3 facts. 1, Death's Head 2 has a codpiece with wires coming out of it that feed into his abdomen, a metal codpiece. Death's Head 2 has a visible jaw that you can see through his smashed cow skull helmet. And Death's Head 2 has a second cyborg inside him, a smaller cyborg who is actually controlling the outside cyborg.
Oh my god, I really was thinking this was going to be easy. Like, I feel like it's the third one, but I also don't know if I remember the cod piece. I'm going to say the cod piece is made up.
No, it was the third one.
Damn it.
It was the third. He did have a copy. Sometimes he wore trousers, but often didn't, and it was just this metal codpiece. I mean, it's Liam Sharp who designed him, and Liam Sharp who's now gone on to really kind of define the modern age of Wonder Woman. But this was kind of, I think this might have been his first pro job, or across the big two anyway. And it's a proper post 2000 AD cyberpunk, early 90s muscles, every single possible extreme feature you could put on a character he has. And I taught myself to draw him for my own amusement. I just thought, I'm going to learn how to draw Death's Head 2. If I can memorize all the different parts of him and get the muscles roughly in the right place, this is going to give people a bit of a laugh 20 years from now. And it does. People love it. It was the best decision I ever made.
It's an incredible plan.
So yes, you have to get his weird cow skull helmet right, his codpiece, his red wire dreadlocks.
Yes.
The big, huge red wires sticking out of his neck that then vanish into his incredibly muscular, triangular torso. One of his arms has claws. The other one's more conventional. Sometimes he has bits of bandage tied around him. He's blue.
Right.
His whole body is blue, obviously. He doesn't have toes. But if you want to go and draw him now, based on what I've just described, I'm pretty sure you can create the. He's got horns. Don't forget his horns.
Is that a mask or is that his face?
Well, he's a I think he's a cyborg.
He's like well, the weird thing is I actually read his Wikipedia page. It's like underrated in its insanity. He apparently was a cyborg he was Death's Head that like was taken over by another cyborg, and then Death's Head basically took over that cyborg from the inside, which is why your third point kind of threw me off. I was like, oh no, I read his Wikipedia page. This seems semi-right.
Yeah, Death's Head, the original Death's Head, is a good character. He was like a Marvel UK character who was funny, used to have good adventures. He could appear in the Transformers comics, and then he got shrunk. Maybe Doctor Who shrunk him. That's true. I think that's right. Doctor Who shrunk the original Death's Head down to man size. Before that, he was huge. He was like a big, tall robot. So kind of Transformers sized. Doctor Who shrunk him. Or Mr. Fantastic, I now can't remember. Now I'm starting to doubt myself. but then this reboot happened. It's like, well, we had this very well designed character, and now we've got this character who's essentially, a cow's skeleton in a body stocking.
Perfect.
With claws, and it's like, yeah, that's about right. That's the way things are going now. Anything goes in comics in 1992. Just do what you want.
Do you feel like you have like a natural affinity for some of like the oddities, the odd characters from like the history of comics? Like, is that something that appeals to you?
If they had to have come out of a certain time, like as a British comics fan, we were starved of like new material. All we got was reprints and the licensed stuff. When Marvel UK appeared, the US driven Marvel UK with Paul Neary as editor in chief, I can't remember. They sent someone over from the US to oversee it all. I was incredibly proud that comics were being produced in the UK for the US market. It was like, oh, look at this. If this works out, maybe one day I can go work at Marvel UK. I'll just come up with a character who's like a shopping trolley with muscles. Brilliant. This is what people want. Apparently Marvel UK, just the bigger the better.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it didn't really work that way. So there was a sense of pride, and Death's Head 2, he seemed like a big character. He was peculiar, but I bought into it. And it was like that. If you sell me something, if you really sell it, like, yeah, this is good, and it was well written, I think. I mean, you might read it now and think, what's going on here? But at the time, I thought, yeah, this is all right. This is okay. My quality threshold is middling. I'll take this. Yeah. And Liam Sharp's art was very exciting in that era. Yeah, you can point to that early stuff now and say, in some ways, this is not perhaps the ultimate, expression of the art form as, Jack Kirby handed it over to us. But it was just exciting, and I was a teenager.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, one thing that came out of Marvel UK is there was the Marvel UK Transformers book, which, so when I was a kid, like, the first comic that I really fell in love with was the Marvel Transformers series. And it's funny because, like, I've talked to people who swear that the Marvel UK version was much, much better. And It's weird. It's like one of those like myths in my head that's like I almost don't want to visit it because like I feel like there's no way it could live up to what I've been told about it. If I remember correctly, there was a different creator that was on the book. There was reprints in the Marvel UK version of the American one, but there was also ones that were written by the guy who did the UK version. Did you read? You read the Transformers ones, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh god, yeah, yeah. So I probably read it from maybe the fourth issue, and it was weekly. So you get 11 pages of Transformers story every week, and then a backup which would be drawn from elsewhere in the Marvel universe. So we get to see some weird stuff that way. That's another reason that I like a lot of weird stuff, is because when I was a kid, it would be backup strips in Marvel UK books, and they tried to find something that was relevant to what the main title was. So I read like Steve Ditko's Machine Man in the back of early issues of Transformers, books that I would never have seen, and also then the Machine Man reboot, the Machine Man 2020. They also, which was like Herbie Trimp and Barry Windsor Smith drawing it together, I think. But yeah, so the UK Transformers, you get 11 pages of Transformers every week. Well, obviously they ran out of material after 2 weeks, so the other 2 weeks would have to be filled by localized. So they would build the stories around the US stories. But the mythology of the UK stories was more complicated, kind of just drawn from more of a British tradition of comics. You know, the kind of slightly Alan Moore-y kind of, you know, the portent of the kind of British comic scene is just slightly different. The storytelling style is slightly different. And so, and those stories just got out of hand, really, I think. And in the end, the guy who wrote the UK stories, when I think Bob Budiansky wrote the book,
yeah,
it was Simon Furman. They just gave him the US book to write, and he did some, you know, and I think people really liked it because he ended up writing loads of the IDW books as well.
Yeah, no, I remember hearing that. I actually interviewed Bob Budiansky, and I never knew he was like the person who had done the Transformers comics, and he told me that, and I got pretty close to just like straight up fanboying out on him. Thankfully, that wasn't a podcast because it would have been a very weird moment for me. Anyways, well, I want to ask. This is gonna be a tough question for you to answer, but maybe it won't be. I don't know. I'm curious. From all of your work, who are the two characters you would say you're the most similar to, or are there any characters that are similar to you?
They're all similar to me, David. They're just all little parts of the kaleidoscopic horror of my personality. I just snap off another bit of my awfulness and stick it on the page for you.
Perfect.
I just lay it all bare. Like the characters who are most like me, in some ways. This is hard. This is maybe giving away too much.
I was going to say, based off the wood part, the sanding and everything like that, it's probably not McGraw.
No, McGraw is the sort of man who, if I, you know, he's the kind of man I want to be.
Right.
He can do anything. You know, I can do a bit of like, you know, woodwork or whatever, but it's never pretty. The very thought I could turn out something beautiful, that's the dream. The very thought you could build your own table.
Yes.
Oh man. Oh, not have to go to the store and buy a new desk. You just go to your wood shop, turn it out, march into the house, showered with kisses. Well done, John. Well done. Oh, what a reverie. So the characters who are most like me, I think I've combined a lot of my embarrassments and other people's embarrassments into Ed Gemmell, who so in some ways he's like me, but in some ways he's not, because I really like found the worst stories that people told me of like humiliation and gave them to him. So I wouldn't want people to think that all things that happened to Ed Gemmell happened to me. But in some ways he's a lot like me because he's quite hesitant, and I was quite hesitant. It's quite a shy retiring flower for a long time. And another character, but then in some ways Shelley Winters is the opposite side of me. Like when I was brave and kind of just, she kind of does those things. So in some ways, but again, you could take little bits of all of them, and it's terrible. It's terrible. It lays things too bare. In some ways, but the longer I've been writing a character, the more they are like me, because the more I've had to strip mine my own experience and give things that I did to them. So yeah, those two though. Let's say Ed Gemmell and Shelley Winters.
I feel like Ed. I would probably say that I'm like the unique combination of Ed and Lottie, which is kind of an odd combination because I'm like alternately like a force of will and also somebody who's just like a nervous wreck. I was especially like Ed when I was in college, though. I feel like Ed is kind of like he is like a prototypical young person's experience in college sometimes, where it's just like you kind of feel like a very nervous about everything to a degree.
That's right. Yeah, there's a lot of broad strokes painted in Ed Gemmell, and so that hopefully people will see something, go like, oh, something bad happened to him, and he's quite a nice guy. He's not a bad dude. He doesn't, sometimes he messes up, but in general, I try and write things in so that people will read that, especially younger readers, and they'll go like, oh, well, that happened to that character, and they survived, and so if something that kind of hideous happens to me, I'll probably survive as well.
I feel like that's like an underrated part about like you look at the comics medium as a whole these days, and like some of like the biggest hits, like Raina Telgemeier, or like we were talking about Vera Brosgol before all this, like their work is like extremely relatable, and I think that's a big part of your stuff too. Is that like somebody reads Giant Days, and even though I was never a college aged girl in England, I still can see myself in these characters, and I feel very much like I had like experiences to them. Same with the Bad Machinery kids. It's like I was never solving mysteries with my friends, but I was running around doing weird stuff with my friends. I was never a mod, though. I'd love to have been a mod. They were very well dressed.
There's still time, David. Just go and get yourself a very sharply cut suit, ride around on a moped around or a scooter around Anchorage. I think you'll have a great time.
I feel like my dream vehicle has always been a Vespa. I feel like in my head, I am exactly who Jack thinks he is in his head.
I think we all are. Poor Jack. Yes, he's very deluded. He's got a real picture of himself. He's a proper aesthete, teen aesthete. He really thinks he's like an intellectual. He thinks he's like Jason Schwartzman, but he's really not. He's just a bit of a doof.
All right, so this brings up a tie into something that's happening in Scary Go Round right now. You currently have you're telling a story that heavily involves unboxing, including a suggestion from Linton that the Wendell and Tackleford tunnel, or the Wentac tunnel, should be unboxed to promote it, which is ridiculous, both in the fact that it probably would work, but also in the fact that it's a completely insane thing, to the point where the towns agree when they both hired YouTube unboxers to unbox their respective ends of the tunnel. I think it's awesome. I think it's hilarious. It made me wonder, though, what are the might be tough, four bizarre modern things you find yourself taking great joy of, even if you aren't fully committed to like wanting to embrace that kind of thing in your own life?
Oh, sure. Well, unboxing videos is one. There's something so peculiar about them. I mean, and I don't really understand the motivation to kind of just open something up very carefully and then describe what's in it, because it's often so boring. It's like, and the guy will be like, well, what do we got here today? We got the Surface Book 2, so we're gonna open up the box and have a look. Okay, so there's a piece of card over the top, Microsoft logo, and what's under that? We got the Beckett with the screen cleaner, and the language, but they're all the same. They've developed this language, this pace, and this language. Well, we're going to open that up, and we're just set that to one side. Right, okay. There's something about it that I find soothing, but also painful at the same time.
I want to say really quick, that was an astonishingly good accent, and it actually felt like you were just playing a YouTube video of somebody unboxing something.
Yeah, it's bad, isn't it? But I only find them by accident, because I'll be looking to try and find out like something like maybe the fan on my Cintiq is loud, and so I'll be on going like Cintiq Pro 16 fan, but then I'll end up with an unboxing video where the guy's like, "Yep, we'll have a look at this now, right? Okay, so underside of the device we've got the two stand points." Why am I watching this? 7 minutes have passed. What am I doing? I could at least be playing it at 1.5 speed. So that's one thing. So 4, modern phenomenon that I find fascinating. 2, South Florida punk rap.
What is that? What's an example?
Lil Pump.
Okay.
Lil Pump, Gucci Gang.
Okay.
Which I believe is the shortest US #1 single of all time. It's awful music. It's hateful. It's effectively over-medicated teenagers telling you how bad their lives are while displaying some of the most astonishing facial tattoos. Oh, I can't remember which rapper it is. I don't think it's Smoke Perp. That's with 2 P's. But it's a similar character who had Anne Frank tattooed on his face.
Well, yeah, why
And
not?
yeah, and he said like, yeah, because I was in a room and I couldn't get the songs out. Yeah, and Anne Frank was stuck in a room and she couldn't get out either. So I thought, yeah, I'll get Anne Frank tattooed on my face. But I've read loads about it, even though I loathe it. Again, it's just a modern phenomenon. It's like, this is so alien to me. I must know more. I must try and get to the heart of this, but I can't get to the heart of it. So that's number 2. A third thing a modern phenomenon that fascinates me. Political podcasts. Ooh. The proliferation of political podcasts in the modern age. There are so many of them. But again, I now understand so much about the US political process that I can put them on as background noise and just prick my ears up, when they start like joking around and having fun. I like people having fun in the context of a US political podcast. So, if it's 538 politics, once they start ribbing each other, that's actually what I'm listening for. I'm not that bothered about, the Russia inquiry. It's just when they start having fun and like ribbing each other. It's like listening to Zoo Radio with no music. So I don't need to listen to 6 political podcasts a week, but weirdly I do. So that's another thing that's probably ruining my life and simultaneously enhancing it. And then the fourth thing, I've given you some real gems here, especially South Florida punk rap.
I was astonished by that. I always appreciate like looks into other worlds. Like I read this history of the Air Force One shoe. And I think I was researching like an Ed Piskor podcast that I was going to do. And I ended up reading like this like long piece on Complex about the history of Air Force Ones. And I've now become like, I own 1 pair of Air Force Ones and I find myself to be like an aficionado of them. I just like, I appreciate them from a distance. It's like this, I could be like run a museum about Air Force Ones now because I find them to be so fascinating.
Exactly. Oh yeah. It's beautiful. Industrial design is beautiful, and it's much more interesting than a lot of things that we take an interest in. And what item has been through so many phases of evolution as the Nike shoe? Mm-hmm. It's a fashion item. It's a sports item. It's been through hundreds of iterations. And so when you look at an Air Force One, that's a pretty special, cultural item and design item. But because it's utilitarian, it's a shoe. Often you don't think about it that way.
It's the most... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please go on.
I was going to say, what the most fascinating thing about Air Force Ones is? They actually basically survived only because shops were creating their own or were getting their own variants. Like they had variant covers effectively of these shoes. And that was the reason why they became such a big hit, because individual stores were getting like store variants. I think they called them colorways. And it was like
colorways, exclusive colorways.
They got exclusive colorways, and it was just like that was what made them such a sensation. And I'm like, there's like weird like comic book overlap. Not that I needed a comic book overlap to make it happen or for it to be interesting to me, but I found it so fascinating that something that is like such a negative thing in comics sometimes was like literally saved this shoe and made it one of the most popular shoes in the history of shoes. It's incredible.
It's great, isn't it? It's all there. It's all there for the taking. I really like the podcast Omnibus, which is one of the How Stuff Works podcasts, where they just take one item of ephemera, 20th century ephemera, and rip it apart. And they're very good at it, and they're very funny as well. But I've become such an ephemera bore because I'm always out there talking about the Noid or something like that. I can't help myself because there's beauty at the heart of all these things if you look close enough. All right, so the fourth thing. Oh, David.
What's it going to be?
My fourth modern fascination. I don't have time for modern fascinations. I spend my whole time in a shed writing in total silence, attempting to generate content.
Besides when you're listening to South Florida punk rap.
Yeah, I don't listen to that a lot. I'd say that's like a safari, You go out, you listen to it, you get terrified, and you head back to the safety of your comfortable life. It's it's not full immersion. It can never be full immersion. Can I talk about one thing?
Yeah.
New Nancy.
Oh yeah.
I love the New Nancy, and it has also sent me back to the old Nancy, the Ernie Bushmiller Nancys, which run constantly on Go Comics, and I love both of them. And that is a modern thing, new modern iteration of something that understands the original iteration of it. both new and old, because it's all about, or half the strip seem to be about her interaction with devices and technology in a way that if you describe it to someone, it sounds dreadful, but it's done with such lightness of touch. But then if you go back to the original ones, there is much about the modern era as was. There's comics about like air conditioning and things like that, getting an air conditioning unit when this would have been a new thing. And you realize this is absolutely true to the original as much as it's a modern reinterpretation. So can that be my fourth thing?
Oh, yeah.
New Nancy and old Nancy.
I that's one thing that's really amazing about it is like there's like such a universality to it. It's just like you read that and it's like you kind of understand the modern times to a degree. You could see like Snapchat, like having like Snapchat references in there or whatever is going to be like maybe it's going to date it, but at the same time it's an of the moment thing. Like that's the nature of strips.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a good modern strip. And in some ways, I think to myself, it's a shame that it has to be a new take on an old strip, and they didn't simply give the creator, who's under a pseudonym, their own strip. But at the same time, it's a great strip. It's a great job and it's come out really well, and it deserves the attention it's got. I mean, obviously, it's got a lot of negative attention from weeping old sores, unhappy. But at the same time, it's got a lot of attention for a talented creator as well, and I think a lot of people are really enjoying it because it's good work.
It's really fun. It seemed like there was a real upswing in attention like over the last few weeks, and it's been fantastic. But I was actually kind of curious, like Scary Go Round largely is a series of strips. Were you a big comic strip person growing up?
Oh yes, for sure. I loved Garfield, and I still do. I love Garth. He's, again, in Giant Days, there's a few occasions where Garfield comes up. He's a constant touchstone for me. I wasn't so sure about Peanuts at the time. Peanuts is never, although I respect it, it was never a great love of mine, although I do love Snoopy. But I did love the TV specials,
yes,
but not the strip. Calvin and Hobbes, I think for everybody of my generation, was this massive touchstone. Bloom County, I loved. And then, slightly more fringe strips as well. But really, the big hitters, they're like the Beatles, they're huge because they were good.
Right.
And they were widely read and they were known by everybody. And I just got, they're real like talismans for me because they're mass art. So yeah, I do love strips. And I'm still investigating. I mean, it's great, all the reprints you can get, like the old Dick Tracy books and the Russ Manning Tarzans. There's so much old stuff that you can dig into now.
Bloom County was really funny because I grew up reading that, and I don't think I understood like half of what I was reading because I was like,
oh, of course you didn't. No, nobody did.
And I was
you're a kid.
I was reading it way later too. I was like reading it 6 years after it was originally published, and I didn't know any of these like Spuds. What was it, like Spuds McKenzie? Like I remember he would appear, and I was like, what the hell is what is Spuds McKenzie? I like dogs. Dogs are great, but I don't know who.
There are
who
loads of strips where they just refer to Lee Iacocca.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Who I think was the chairman of president of Chrysler.
Yeah,
perhaps?
something like that.
But there was no context for this when I read them. I read them all as the collections. It's like, who is Lee Iacocca? I'll just go with it. I'll just roll with it.
It gave me a wildly like inaccurate view of what Mary Kay salespeople were like, though. So, all right. So I'm going to close with some quick ones. I want to talk about Eurovision. It was one of the things you had tweeted about recently. For listeners that don't know, it's an international song competition between European countries where incredible things happen. I know you're a music guy. For Americans who don't understand the glory of Eurovision, what are your 3 favorite things about it?
3 favorite things about Eurovision. Oh, one, it's political. It's not the merits of the songs are not 100% the reason for the voting, because there are blocks of Russian countries and former Yugoslavian, the Balkan countries, who just vote for each other over and above everything else. So there's a constant feeling that you are being treated unfairly. Also, the UK used to do well in it, and then after the Iraq War, we were no longer considered worthy of votes from the majority of European nations. I think the year after the Iraq War, I believe we got 0 points that year. Yeah, and we've never recovered. We can never win ever again. So it's a very, but so one, it's political, which is funny, but two, it's political in a good way, in the sense that it's a very like LGBT friendly thing. It's always been beloved of that community, and it takes that kind of the sort of vivacity of culture of that scene into countries where it is not really tolerated. Places like Belarus, perhaps. And I want to be careful in the countries that I name, because I don't want to name the wrong ones. But I mean, I believe Russia actually may have banned it 1 year. But it does. It takes that last one. It was the first place that you saw like trans performers like on mainstream television, like Dana International and Conchita Wurst. So, but three, it's just fun. It's bananas. You get to see countries letting it all hang out in ways that they don't normally through the medium of song. It's got like big costumes, nutty stage presentations. It gets bigger and wilder every year, the presentation. You get loads of really interesting on-stage things. I mean, the songs, you don't remember 99% of them the day after, but you'll remember the performers because it's, you're seeing something that you wouldn't normally see. I think anything that opens up like cultural windows. It was created in the wake of World War II with a message of peace. And that effectively is what it is. Still, it's a way that all these countries who had been at war, you have to remember, countries in Europe were in war with each other constantly, and like regional conflicts and things like that. So, yeah, there you go. That's three things in one, really, but they're all kind of political points. But it is also fun. It's loopy fun, and it means something. And it's important to remember that it means something while you're watching some of the most meaningless pop music ever delivered straight into your home.
And they're still at war, but it's war by song now, which is much preferable.
Exactly. It reminds. There's a Guy Maddin film, The Saddest Music in the World, which is one of my favourite films, which is about a brewery-sponsored international song contest, which I would recommend anybody seek out, perhaps before they watch Eurovision. It's a great film.
So tying into that, I'm curious, which two Bobbins verse characters do you imagine would be the most into Eurovision?
Who would be most into Eurovision? Well, I think Mildred, definitely. Mildred, she's something of a scamp. She's very open to in irreverence, and so I think she would love it. And then Desmond Fishman, who I believe would sit rapt at every song, perhaps performing his own childlike dance moves to them, doing the phone voting, perhaps voting for multiple countries. Yes, Desmond, because he's got that wide-eyed innocence.
Could you see him perform in a theatrical sense? I feel like I could see him be part of it at least.
I'd love to see him. I'd love to see him selected to represent the UK for Eurovision. I mean, that could happen, David. We could make that happen.
Oh my God.
And then so he'd go. Yeah, he'd love it. He'd have a great time. He'd get no points. I mean, he's got an awful singing voice. It's ghastly, but yes, absolutely.
Okay, so last question. I want to bring up, we'll go back to old school comic clubs. I'm not going to ask you the influence question or the inspiration for your art question, because like that's been done a million times. But I do want to ask, like going back to ye olden days of comic fandom, who were like the 4 comic artists who had you most excited about like making your own art? Were there artists that really moved you back then?
Oh, definitely. So, Brett Blevins on New Mutants. I think it was Brett Blevins and Terry Austin together. I loved Brett's work. I still have a little stash of his comics over my desk. Just he was at his peak of kind of cartooning and layout then. A great artist and underrated as well. He just didn't fit into the kind of early 90s Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld axis, and I think went into other areas of illustration. But I think his comics his run on New Mutants was about as good as it gets.
He actually has a new comic coming out.
Yes, I believe with his son, perhaps with his son writing it.
Yeah,
I
think it's Joe.
Oh no,
Joe Keating is writing it. It's like I think it's called like Stellar. It's like a new Image series that's coming out, and apparently.
Oh really?
Apparently, Robert Kirkman was a huge fan, and like if I'm horribly butchering this, I apologize to all listeners, but it was I think Kirkman was a huge fan and came up with the idea for it, and basically they're like bringing it to life, and it's just because like they're such big fans of his art. and like the stuff looks fantastic. Like I honestly don't like when I think of New Mutants. Naturally, I think of like Sienkiewicz. But actually, really quick aside, Sienkiewicz, I couldn't stand him when I was a kid because I was horrified of his art, which I think was kind of a feature.
Oh, you were meant to be, yeah. Like, oh no, I found it completely alienating when I was a child, and now when I look at those New Mutants pages, I'm like, this is some of the most incredible mainstream cartooning ever done. When you like the thing with the bear, you know,
the Demon Bear, yeah, I remember seeing that
Demon
cover.
Bear.
I honestly, I got that comic, and I think it's the only comic I've ever gotten and never opened because I was like, I don't want to see what's inside of this because I think it will scare me.
Yeah, what an incredible artist Bill Sienkiewicz is. So I would say these days he's someone that I look at it and go, that's what I want to be like. In fact, when I do covers, I couldn't replicate his style, but I always look to see what a great cover looks like. So other artists, David Mazzucchelli.
Yes.
Just always, you know, like he's not flashy, but everything is perfect. Like I look at his comics and I never tire. I mean, his style changed so much, but I love his Batman comics. Is it Year One?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Year One. His Daredevil comics. I can't get over how good his layouts are.
Yeah.
I still can't. I still keep those books around. There's an British artist called Jeff Senior who worked on Transformers when I was a kid, and even when I was 8 or 9, he's kind of the artist where I learned to look for the art credits because I would look to see who'd drawn these incredible looking comics, and if it was Jeff, I was there basically every single time. He was just so strong. He still works, and I believe he's maybe even working on new series with Nick Roach,
like a Transformers.
Yeah, maybe like a Wreckers series that may already be running. I'm not sure. I've not been keeping up. Since I've been working on By Night, my attention has wandered because I've been busy. But I believe he's working with Nick Roach on a new series. And then fourth artist, is this from when I was young or from now?
I would say when you were young, but if you want to throw in somebody from now, that's totally fine too.
No, that's fine. I can do another one from when I was young. John Romita Jr. Again, you know, he's very much he's a similar school to David Mazzucchelli. There was something about that really sort of bold 80s style. Like he was very interested in fashion, which is something that interests me. You know, the characters would have good clothes, the costumes would change. His run on X-Men in the 80s was pretty big for me. Daredevil again, Typhoid Mary. Yeah, what art? I think I like his 80s stuff best. I think he did, his work changed as he's got older. I think but I think the sort of youthful vigor of his sort of working when he's in his 20s is something that, again, when I think of good comics and what they look like, even though I love so many different artists and modern artists, I still think back to those books and think, how would I ever touch that?
The weird thing about Ramada, like, or when you're talking about his, or when you're talking about his work and everything, is that like, I feel like his work has gotten, like, his character work is like bulkier. It's like his characters feel like I don't know why that is, but in my head it's just like it's like almost they've kind of expanded and they feel a little bit less like human like than they used to. I still really enjoy his work, and he just did this cover for Nightwing that was astonishing. But it is kind of fascinating how like those, you know, people kind of progress in their art and change and everything like that. That's one thing I think, you know, kind of going back to all the way back to when we were talking about X-Files. One of the interesting things about Mazzucchelli is the fact that like he has this like pristine record, like this record that nobody can really hang with because he's had nothing but like just straight up hits, like perfect books, like Year One and Asira's Polyp and the Daredevil stuff. And besides that, I mean, he's been teaching, but he doesn't really work that much anymore. It's kind of like he's like one of the few people who's just like 100% pure goodness, and that's a hard record to hold up with.
Oh, sure. I think there's a point where you feel like, do I have more to say?
Right.
I sometimes feel a bit like that. It's like I've written thousands of pages now, and I think to myself, is there going to be a point where it's not that I couldn't write more comics, but it's like, do I need to write more comics? But that's the thing about writing again. It's like, I think I'll always want to draw because I know there's always space for me to draw something new and to learn something new. But with writing, it's like, there might be a point where I just say, well, I don't know, that's it now. You know, I think I've pretty much done as much as I want to do, if that makes sense. Yeah, and I think maybe that's the way David feels. He feels like he's done about as much as he wants to do in terms of generating stuff out of himself.
That's kind of interesting. Like, do you feel like part of the reason why you could see yourself continuing to draw and like not running out of things to draw is because writing comes a lot easier to you? Like, is there a relationship there, or is it just like you kind of feel like you've said your piece? You could see yourself saying your piece before you got to the point where you've gotten as far as you want to get with your art.
Well, when I started in comics, like making them for other people to read wider than just like drawing them and then hiding them in my my cupboard
Right.
after I'd finished drawing them, which I think is how most of us start, really. I kind of had
my parents' house is just like there's like a closet somewhere that's just filled with old sketchbooks of mine, and it's basically like very 90s influence. I feel like there's a fair amount of pouches involved that I should not let people see.
Oh, of course. Oh, we've all got pouches in our closets, David. Don't worry about that. But yeah, when I started making comics, I thought, right, I want to do comics. I looked at strips and I thought, right, I want to do comics that can connect with a mass audience, not just the pouch audience. Because it was like the time of Lady Death and things like that. And it was a bit embarrassing that sometimes going with your friends into a comic shop because they'd look at the sort of muscle-bound or large-breasted wall of that month's titles, and you think that doesn't really represent my hobby or what I get out of comics. It just looks like a very violent, sexist wall. So I kind of wanted to make comics that people would be able to read regardless. And I've kind of managed that. I've managed to sustain a book for however many issues it is now. Maybe I've just written the 41st Giant Days, and I've kind of written a book that was exactly what I wanted a comic to be like. And I can continue to make comics because I've learned loads of things since, but I've kind of done what I wanted to do. But in terms of drawing, I'd love to be as good an artist as Alex Toth. I don't think I'm ever going to be as good an artist as Alex Toth, but it could take me my whole life to get there. I achieved in writing in comics what I wanted to do, and that was sort of all I wanted to do. But in art, I think I've still got a really, really long way to go to be able to draw as well as the people that I admired when I was, 7 and 8 and 9.
Yeah. I always think that's one of the things I think is interesting about art is like, I feel like everybody kind of aspires to like be like Toth because he's just like, I mean, he's the best. But at the same time, it's just like, I think that we're in an interesting era because it's like the way that you draw isn't as important as it once was. Because like now it's like storytelling feels more important than ever. Like you can have somebody like Kate Beaton be just like a gigantic superstar and she doesn't draw like Toth, but she's so good at conveying the story and the humor and like the beats and everything that she wants to with her art that it's like, I don't know. It's like, I guess it's less a style thing, and you're not really speaking about Toth like in a style way, right? You're speaking about like the quality of drawing.
Yeah, that's it. Just being able to draw everything.
Right.
Just being able to, and because he was the ultimate storyteller as well, like in terms of the way he would frame a scene. That's why he ended up, with all those beautiful storyboards for all the cartoons he did that were so much better than the actual cartoon, all the Hanna-Barbera stuff or Ruby Spears, where his storyboards are gorgeous, and then the comic they produce from it, or rather the cartoon they produce from it, really doesn't quite live up to his artwork. But yeah, I want the whole tool set. I want to be able to get better and better at laying something out and telling a story. And while I'm writing, I kind of can't give my full attention to that. But I don't know if I have the skills to ever make a living as a comics artist, whereas I am making a living as a comics writer. So.
Could you see yourself wanting to draw other people's scripts?
Yes, but at the same time, I think I would be very picky about them. I think it would be hard for me to take a script that I didn't really love. I wouldn't, if there was a word that was wrong, it would rankle me a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's like, but I'd like to, how Mike Allred, he writes and he draws, doesn't he? And he separates the two things out. Sometimes he wants to write a series and sometimes he wants to draw a series. And the work's always good, so...
Yeah, I always find that to be really fascinating. It's like I had Brian Lee O'Malley and Leslie Hung from Snockerel on the podcast separately, and we like kind of talked from their, or hearing about the book from their individual perspectives was really interesting because it was like really Brian just wanted to work with Leslie, and so they found a way to like bring what she wanted to draw to life in a book, and then that's how Snockerel kind of came to be. And it's like I feel like that kind of environment for what you're looking for would be. It is feasible, but it is kind of tough, especially if like the words could rankle you. I could see that being tough because you're very particular in the way that you like to write.
Of course you are. Yeah, that's it. When you've been doing things your own way, it's like a man who tries to, move in with his girlfriend at 45, having lived on his own for 25 years. It's going to be a pretty difficult process.
Mm-hmm.
He's not gonna find it that easy to, bend to someone else's fairly reasonable demands. It's because he's very used to doing things his own way, and I worry that I'm a little bit that way. But at the same time, if you're collaborating with someone you really respect, you'll be able to have a conversation about something. Because I'm not a brute to work with. At least I don't think I am. You'll have to ask someone else, but I don't think I'm a brute to work with. So I would really like to draw someone else's writing. I think it would open doors that I haven't lent on yet.
Is this the 20th year of the Bobbins verse?
It is. October, I think, is the 20th anniversary, or late September, early October is the 20th anniversary of me starting it. Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. I just thought of that. If I was a good podcast host, I would have brought that up much earlier, but now I'm bringing it up at the very end. Well, either way, congratulations on 20 years. I'm excited for By Night. John, that's all I have for you. Thank you for power ranking all kinds of ridiculousness with me.
Hey, my pleasure, David. Speak to you again sometime.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist John Allison. You can find John on Twitter at Bad Machinery, his webcomic Scary Go Round on scaryGoRound.com, and his comics like Giant Days, Bad Machinery, and his upcoming Boom Studio series By Night with artist Christine Larson in comic shops everywhere. If you're a fan of the show, check out the show on Patreon. If you back it on there, you not only support the show, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to exclusive written and audio content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find the show on social media as well. Like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Mike DiArgenio, Dylan Campbell, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Michael Garland, Mabrind, Nick, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, David, Jason Assey, Mike Gillis, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Dan Guarino, Dan Lee, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruta Batista, Abraham Reisman, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Michael Perlman, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Alvino, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfield, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.